It was a terrible band in the beginning, a noxious heap of discordant noise with a set list guaranteed to alienate all but the most elitist of garage rock record collectors. As its founder and leader, I had no right to ever think performing music could be an avocation. "You guys would be big if you were in London," suggested a fellow Anglophile and record store clerk who mentored me through my earliest fanboy days in Moline, Illinois. With a dwindling populace kneecapped by factory closings throughout the 1970s and 1980s, the area, including Rock Island and neighboring Iowa cities Davenport and Bettendorf just over the Mississippi River, aka the Quad Cities, by dint of its geographical isolation labored under a cultural bias that favored Chicago and dismissed the remainder of the Midwest as flyover country. Life in a semi-working band would have been easier had I been a fan of such hoary 1970s classics as Old-Time Rock and Roll, Carry On, Wayward Son, and Mama Let Him Play, 3 songs among the many lodged in permanent rotation, still on the equally hoary FM rock station. The tunes were impervious to discerning tastes, as were the cover bands who chose to play them year after year on the local bar circuit. Formed by dullards with an image as captivating as a police lineup, they would nevertheless drape scarves around their fire hydrant necks as a concession to Keith Richards in elegantly wasted rock star fashion. At the time, I favored British invasion rock for its image, wit, and transcendent melodies. The chill and thunder of those great English sides, as frenetic writer Lester Bangs described it in his review of David Bowie's retro covers album Pin-Ups. I zeroed in on The Who and the Kinks in particular, full of sonic rage and housed in picture sleeves depicting gap-toothed, trowel-nosed band members caught in mid-blink. Those early albums spoke not only to our 3-chord mastery, but also allowed us to revel in our own physical unattractiveness. In 1975, a muso fixated on albino blues growler Johnny Winter pulled me aside in a guitar shop and derisively referred to my band as oldies rock, pointing to our amped-up covers of Del Shannon, Small Faces, and our beloved Who and Kinks. "Music is going to evolve and get more complex," he sniffed, dismissing our approach out of hand. By 1976, citing musical influences he had yet to fully comprehend, he determined we were really punk rock. Meant as a put-down by the last to know, punk rock gave neophytes the opportunity to be lousy. No longer would such dilettantes be required to spend 10 years in their parents' basement, perfecting guitar scales before being deigned ready for public consumption. If you knew a few chords and had something to say, it was now your right to challenge the preconceptions of an audience dumbed down from a mix of Pills, Boone's Farm, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Pete Townshend was 19 when The Who released their debut single, I Can't Explain, and 20 when the band's My Generation made the British record charts. Scared I would miss my own shot at becoming spokesperson for a generation, I booked a recording session on my own 19th birthday, and we cut 2 songs. I reimagined Iggy and the Stooges' Search and Destroy, coupled with the easy beats Women Make You Feel Alright. 2 disparate influences I plundered as a songwriter on PS and Look What I've Got. Bursting with pride over our collective musical achievement, I shared the 45 with a former high school classmate who declared it not very good. Despite such critical drubbing, it received a smattering of airplay locally and a decent review in the now-defunct Trouser Press magazine, the arbiter of all things hip, independent, and self-consciously retro in the late 1970s. Jim Records, a distributor specializing in such recordings, offered to purchase 500 copies, but with a caveat. Our band was called No Dice, but another similarly named outfit, on Capitol Records no less, had an album and would certainly sue all of us should we market ourselves under the same moniker. We rechristened ourselves PS after the single and duly affixed correction labels over the now redundant band name printed on the record. Though our spiky little 45 would sell in negligible amounts in 1978, in 2019 it was trading hands among record dealers and collectors for as high as $80 in such far-flung markets as the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, and Australia. Post-graduation, we negotiated real life versus high school as the decade sputtered along like a slipping chain on a sprocket. Our singer went AWOL. We tightened up as a trio and stopped getting fired. We weren't above playing on top of plywood-covered pool tables, the makeshift stage of choice at one of our regular venues in Tama, Iowa. On the occasions we ventured out of our refuge that increasingly was my parents' basement, where we had begun producing 4-track recordings of original material. By 1985, the band was floundering. We'd played scores of dumps within a 200-mile radius of Moline. 8 hours north, the Minneapolis music scene was exploding with Prince and the Time, whose lead guitarist Jesse Johnson had been jamming in Quad City's dives until local blues singer Ernie Peniston hipped Prince's scouts to Johnson's musical abilities and sartorial flash. A friend of mine in Minneapolis was taking music lessons from former punk pioneer and Suicide Commandos guitarist Chris Osgood, who was working for Twin Tone Records, home of the Wallets, the Suburbs, and the Replacements. Connection made, I left Moline for Minneapolis with a box of 25 homemade demo cassettes and a sense of history. While I shopped at Orfolk Jokopus, Minneapolis's premier record shop, in came Osgood with a stack of albums by Jonathan Richman, Twin Tone's latest signing. I made the proper intros and a few days later arrived at Twin Tone's offices to play them my demo during an area power failure. The Replacements, recording Tim when the blackout hit, were loitering in the hall. Electricity restored, Osgood and another staffer named Dave Ayers were encouraging, pointing to an office cubbyhole overflowing with manila envelopes containing demos from other unknowns, very few of whom were likely to make it past Twin Tone's gatekeepers as I had. Within weeks, PS was at Twin Tone recording for the label's Big Hits of Mid-America Volume 4 compilation. A barefoot Grant Hart, drummer for indie pop-punks Husker Du, led us into the building, full of compliments regarding our demo tape. Osgood and engineer Steve Feltstad, the latter had produced tracks for alternative rock gods REM among many others, hustled us into the studio where we nervously knocked out 3 of our own songs. In a nearby office, I cornered Bob Mould, the morose leader of Husker Du. For a guy whose band was gracing covers of multiple music magazines in Great Britain and fielding offers from several major labels, I found him to be a reluctant rock hero who dreaded touring overseas. He revealed that when Husker Du started, they borrowed $4,000, splitting the amount evenly between recording their debut and hitting the road. Big Hits of Mid-America Volume 4, featuring the PS track Further to Go, came out in 1986. We were a last-minute add-on to the album release party held at First Avenue, a former city bus barn whose sticky, beer-soaked stage had been transmogrified for the concert scenes in Prince's film Purple Rain. Because we were the only non-Minneapolis act, Twin Tone mistakenly thought we wouldn't want to make the 8-hour trip from Illinois to appear, little dreaming the gig was a lifeline to us. We played well, and afterward Fry Cook, avowed Christian, Mark Olson asked if we might be interested in doing some shows together with his new band, the Jayhawks. Press was positive. A review appeared in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune the next day, and with visions of imminent rock stardom in our heads, we drove back to Moline and waited for the rest of our lives, as it turned out. We headlined several shows to diminishing returns at the 7th Street entry, First Avenue's club within a club. I continued sending tapes to Osgood and pressing for closure regarding our future with Twin Tone. Eventually, I was reduced to using Osgood's name to gain phone access to reps at other labels. Osgood's sage wisdom echoed in my head. There's a point where you tire of sleeping on some stranger's floor surrounded by cat poop and your band is earning $50 a night, versus being curled up in the cozy bed of your girlfriend in her warm apartment. On our home turf, we supported acts Mojo Nixon, Joey Mollen's Badfinger, and BTO, formerly Bachman-Turner Overdrive, minus founding member Randy Bachman, who wouldn't allow bandmates use of his name. We also supported The Fountainhead, The Outnumbered, Bad Examples, Liars, and others. The Meat Puppets were a standout, not for musical brilliance, but for blowing out our bass bends. I cobbled together another $4,500 through loans, and took PS into a 24-track studio to record what I hoped would be our long-overdue debut album. But my increasingly dispirited and estranged bandmates had been slammed to the mat one too many times by the elusive promises of the music industry. They bailed, and I was left holding the bag for the band financially and creatively. I completed many of the tracks myself and shelved the results for 12 years, bringing out a portion of the sessions on a CD issued under my own name, called Me First. I still have my journals from those days, a period that in retrospect seems like a colossal waste given the outcome. While others were pursuing educations, raising families, and building careers, I was somewhere in Iowa standing on a plywood-covered pool table with my guitar and amp, living the dream. My day job entails three things I hate: driving a truck, heavy lifting, and dealing with those who assume service industry people exist to be abused by lesser beings. Child support dropped me kicking and screaming into this particular occupation, while the relative solitude behind the steering wheel gives me ample time to reflect on my epic failures. I've spent most of my working life rising in the middle of the night. My alarm clock is set for 3:30 a.m., and on the rare occasions I don't hear it, I wake up constantly. My wife has her cell phone set to blast the dulcet tones of Johnny Rotten and the Sex Pistols screaming "Anarchy in the UK." I pile out of bed and take note of whatever new lumps and bumps have sprouted on my body overnight. I inventory the day's aches and pains. I inherited a chronic bad back, and sometimes it takes me more than an hour of moving to straighten up because it feels like I have a cement girdle around my middle on my worst days. In recent years, it's the stiffness in my hands that worries me. They feel like catcher's mitts, a kind of carpal tunnel that's no doubt the result of flinging around hundreds of 30-pound boxes daily. One of my own private heebie-jeebies is that one day this carcass I inhabit will fail and will be homeless as a result. Given my level of fatigue, I fight with a pile of clothes on the floor, gathering the energy to pull on several layers of heavy socks and shirts, insulation from the Arctic winter currently hitting our part of the country. I've yet to own a pair of steel-toed work boots that didn't hurt my feet. Assured I have my various phones, my paperwork, and travel bag. I work exclusively overnights. I return to my dozing wife to say goodbye. "I miss you when you're gone," she mutters as I kiss her. I envy the fact that she gets to roll over and go back to sleep. She's been out of a job for 2 years. We both suspect ageism on the part of potential employers, but not having an income of her own both enrages and depresses her. We live in a rural area on the Kentucky-Tennessee border outside of Nashville. We're free from the madness that is Music City. By the time I fly off the interstate onto our exit ramp, I've logged hundreds of miles behind the wheel of 2 vehicles, and my psyche is drained. Nothing reassures me more than seeing my wife standing at the back door of our home, her shirt stained with flour and my dinner ready. With the night's entertainment queued up on the DVD player, my agoraphobia kicks in big time. People who meet me assume that I'm calm and measured, but it's all a facade. There's a definite fight-or-flight aspect to my character. Mentally and physically, I've been leaving my hometown in bits and pieces since I was 14. Having my band was a controlled attempt at surrounding my anxiety-ridden self within the protective confines of a gang. I've always been somewhat of a turtle without a shell, the weird loner at school that never fit in, a target for bullies, whether classmates or figures of authority. In my teens and early 20s, I wanted a musical career to justify my strangeness and to avoid the monotony of a real job. I reached my 30s still struggling to hold on to my teenage dreams, with 3 children by different mothers and the fiscal responsibilities of a working-class parent. As I entered my 40s, what I wanted and what I thought I might still achieve were becoming increasingly nebulous as I juggled rent and child support obligations while maintaining guest star status in a bad marriage that further eroded my self-esteem. Life at 60 has left me with a primordial need to address my own mortality. All I know is I want to leave behind more than a stack of documents rubber-stamped by a family court judge and a tote of income tax returns.
And if this could count for something, I'd give it all to you.